Hello and welcome to episode 33 of the Your Way podcast. So, this is part two of little snippets of my story of awakening. And if you missed part one, this will be a standalone, but go back and listen to that one. That is more around kind of corporate practical stuff, awakening to realizing that the work you're doing doesn't really light you up, it doesn't excite you, awakening to what do we find fun? Who are we? What do we want? All of those questions that so many of us never really got the opportunity to explore until we intentionally chose to do so as adults, right? So go back and listen to that if you haven't done already. This week, I want to dive into some of the less conventional parts of my awakening. And again, just thinking of it for yourself and your journey. If any of it gives you any little nudges that you want to go away and explore, then, invitation to do that. If some of it isn't really your bag, then invitation to leave that, right? This is the Your Way podcast. You do it your way. I'm sharing my story to help and support you, but you don't need to resonate with all of it. You don't need to agree with all of it. But I would love to hear what your takeaways are. Come and let me know. And I would also love for you to share this episode and any other episodes that you listen to that you think other people might find helpful. Really does make a difference when you listen and you like and you share and you leave reviews so that other people can find this stuff, because we don't awaken by magic. We don't find this stuff by magic. We don't experience stuff that shift our paradigms and our way of being if we don't get to experience them. So if you think people would find this helpful, please share, leave me a review, comment, all of those good things. I'm incredibly grateful to those of you who do so. So let's dive in, shall we? I started working with my first coach, a lady who I mentioned last week, Danielle North, in 2019. And I remember her saying in one of our early sessions, we were talking about, I have this wound about not feeling wanted and trying to make up for not feeling good enough and not feeling wanted and trying to prove myself, trying to earn the right to exist, right? We've if you've been around a while, you've heard me talk about this. And it was in like our second or third session. And she was like, you don't need anyone's approval to be here. Like, you've got God's approval. I remember thinking, oh, why is she talking to me about God? Like, religion, not my thing. Raised a Catholic, decided that was not for me when I was about 16. And I was very much switched on from anything that wasn't deeply scientific, deeply head-based. I was like a floating head and neck, wasn't really connected into my body. And little things happened along the way. I would get these little nudges or these little curiosities, and I would follow them. And I always considered myself to be really open. So in 2020, after the pandemic, we moved down to Somerset for 6 months. And I remember being down in Somerset because I remember one day I'd been like astrology had piqued my curiosity. I was interested in the moon and the moon cycles. And I was listening to, I can't remember which one it was, but either a full moon update or a new moon update. I quite like to learn about what's going on around the moons. And Nat, my husband, walked into my office at the time and he heard this YouTube video that I was listening to and he completely freaked. He was like, oh my goodness, like what is happening to you? This is ridiculous. Like, what kind of absolute nonsense are you listening to? And I was like, well, like it's the moon. And, if it can change the tides, if it can impact that water on Earth, and we are like mostly made up of water, and maybe it could impact us as well. Maybe there's something else to it. And he was like, this is ridiculous. Like, this is absolute nonsense. And then other stuff happened around that time as well. So we rented this barn for 6 months before we bought where we live now, up in the Cotswolds. And I really didn't like the feeling of this barn. And I remember talking to Danielle about it. And she was like, well, you could clear the space. She was like, you could get some sage and you could clear the space. And I was like, yeah, my marriage is not going to survive me clearing the space with sage. Like, it's not like it's going to smell. It's not going to work. Said, well, you can also clear space with sound. Like you could get yourself a sound bowl. So I diligently went off and I bought myself. I still have it now. I use it every single day. This lovely metal Tibetan sound bowl. I went round and I cleared the space. Um, but I'm kind of going through the motions at this point. Like I'm doing these things. I'm starting to lean into these practices that feel good for me, but not really with a connection to anything else. Um, but that happened. Like I enjoyed it. It felt good. I enjoyed the sound bowl and I started to explore. And I will, those of you watching on YouTube can see this. And then I had this memory in one of our sessions. So when I was a kid, I grew up in a town called Doncaster, like pretty normal town. It's got some quite rough parts. It hasn't got the best reputation. And when I was a kid, our school trips were either to the local nature reserve or to the local museum. And when we would go on these school trips to the local museum, and I would have my spending money, and I feel like it was £1. You could buy these little boxes of stones for £1, and I was always like fascinated by these stones. And they were like all different colours and shiny and lovely. And I loved, like, I would always get my little box of stones from the museum. But what I always wanted from the museum was they also sold crystals and they'd have these big amethysts. And I really felt drawn, like as a kid, I really felt drawn to amethyst. And I'd completely forgotten this. But I remember it one day in a session. And Danielle's never one for like go and do this. It's always like, well, you could explore this or see what feels good, and maybe you could go to a crystal shop and see what piques your interest. So sometime later, I then buy myself this amethyst, which I absolutely love. And it kind of sits in the background doing its thing. And then when I looked into it, amethyst was all about healing and protection. And it just really intrigued me that as a kid, sort of age 7-ish, um, I was really, really drawn to the amethyst. Now, you could just say, well, look, love, it's because it's shiny and purple and it piqued your interest because it was like a lovely shiny thing. Um, but it was just something that was interesting for me of like, oh, so actually there was interest for me in stones and crystals from this really, really young age, but I'd forgotten this part of myself. So this stuff starts to unfold. Um, and then I'm in my business and my business is growing and I spend a period of time where I'm really business focused. I'm really business focused. I'm really interested in making money and getting my business back to the place it was, or getting my income back to the place it was when I was a lawyer. And so that became my focus. Um, and so I went and I did lots of business masterminds and I learned all the skills and the tools so that I could create this business that I wanted, which I did, and I did very well. But the other stuff kind of took a backseat. And then towards the end of 2020, I came across it's kind of like the spiritual version of Myers-Briggs. I came across a methodology called human design. And that was based on a combination of astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the Kabbalah, and then I think it also has something to do with the tree of life. Okay. So I spent some time working with a human design coach and looking at, how stuff that isn't necessarily other, I mean, they can explain it by science, but if you're a conventional scientist, it's not scientific, right? How all of that stuff led me to who I was and how I was. Like, how is my personality shaped by my birthplace and my time of birth and my date of birth? Like, that's the astrology stuff. Where does my human design show me that I'm going to struggle in life, or where are my challenges to be resolved? What are my shadows? What are my gifts? Because I also then did some work around gene keys. So gene keys is like linked to human design. So there's all of these things that I'm kind of exploring, but not going all in on. Like for many, many years, I was like, I've sort of dipped to toe into some of these like spiritual things. I guess you'd call it new age, these like new age spiritual ideas, but we're still kind of on the periphery. But all of this stuff was allowing me to become more conscious, more open, more curious, and more understanding. Right? I'd switched myself off from all of these parts of me. Then I started doing my trauma certification and my trauma work in 2021. And I gained this deeper understanding and connection of myself and of my body. I start to feel things. I start to experience more stuff. I mean, a lot of that was feelings that I pushed down for a really, really long time. But I also felt this great connection to nature. Like I realized that when I went outside, when I was in nature, I felt more alive and more vibrant. And yes, science can explain that as well, but it felt deeper than that. I felt like this deep connection. And then over time, this has evolved to this understanding of how we are all connected and we are all energy. And and that maybe there is a something else. Now for me, the something else isn't God. Like I'm not a religious person. Um, my personal views around many organized religions are that there's a lot of control and fear-based stuff in there, which is a lot of how society runs. And for me, if there's a something else out there, it's love. Like, it's love, it's connection, it's peace. It's like it's the positive stuff. I don't think fear and control-based stuff really emulates in a way that I can resonate with. So this stuff happens, and I'm still like 1 foot in, 1 foot, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But kind of curious, but the like scientific ex-lawyer part of me's like, yeah, but it's all nonsense. And my husband thinks it's all nonsense. And actually, if I'm going to embrace this stuff, am I going to lose my marriage? Like, what's it going to mean? People are going to think I've absolutely lost the plot. Um, but I keep following the nudges. Like one of my big things is, can I follow where life is leading me? So keep following the nudges, keep following the nudges. I had this beautiful coaching session one time when I turn up, and in like nervous system language, I'm dissociated, right? Which means a bit disconnected in the freeze state. This may or may not mean anything to you, doesn't really matter, but like a bit checked out. Okay. And my coach says, about halfway through the session, she's like, you're back. She's like, where have you been? And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, you were not in your body for the beginning of that session. So the more spiritual philosophy around dissociation or disconnection or freeze is that something happens that means that our soul leaves our body because it can't be there. And we have this whole exploration around like, where have I gone? Where do I go? And I'm able to answer all the questions. Like it's amazing. I'm like, oh, I can see exactly where I've gone. This is where I am. I'm like Casper the Friendly Ghost swimming around, and I'm answering all these questions, but from this very like practical, logical, I mean, I'm doing this stuff and I'm having these thoughts coming through, but at the same time, I'm deeply skeptical. I'm deeply skeptical. Like, not really sure about this. So fast forward again, and I'm like going in and out of phases, right? And then I'm focused on my business. Can I grow my business? And I keep pushing in my business. Um, and I get this email at the start of 2022, listing out and explaining a retreat that's going to happen that July. And there is just something in my body. So I've done lots of trauma work at this point. I'm very connected into myself. I've done an awful lot of my healing. Um, there's been lots of work done, like the gene keys, the human design, all of these different pieces. I'm starting to like lean into, yeah, there might be something else. People are talking about the universe, and I'm like, yeah, there might be a universe. I'm not really sure, but maybe. Um, and the retreat that I go on is called the Transcendental Pause, right? It's like big shift, big transformation. And I talked about this on a podcast with Catherine Morrison when I think this podcast was still called the Embodied Life Coaching Podcast. And I shared about some of my experiences. And I did a thing called Cambo, which is, oh, what's the word? It's not a mind altering thing. You know, like you do ayahuasca and it's like you're off, or you do psilocybin and you're off for a while. This was much more body based, but in that same genre of like plant medicine healing stuff. And I had that experience and I do my first ever all in the same week. I do my first ever breathwork session, transformational breathwork, so powerful. Um, the sound baths. We're in nature, we're on this like ancient oak woodland, 3,000-year old, like sacred land. There's mycelium in the soil, because the land's so old, and that's like how everything gets connected. And it's just this lovely, lovely, nourishing experience. And I had these profound, profound shifts and some experiences that I can't explain. There's no rational explanation for this stuff. And I come back from this retreat, like, to be honest, a bit freaked out because I'm like, what the fuck is happening? And I have all of these experiences, and then I get back, and within a really short space of time, I get stung by a bee on my face and then two wasps on my leg. And I'm like, nature is attacking me. And then I'm like, oh, is it trying to give me a sign? Or like, what's going on? And all of these things happen. And all of these things start opening me up to, well, actually, maybe all of life is trying to communicate with me. Maybe there is something more. I get curious about my dreams. I like, are my dreams giving me guidance? Like, what's going on there? And I go back over the course of the next year. I also did a breathwork retreat, but I went back to this place another 3 times for 3 more retreats, like each one more profound. So like one day we're doing a walking that was silent, like a half day silent in silence. If you want to come face to face with all of the stuff that's going on inside of you that you don't give yourself time to feel because you keep yourself being busy, try being in silence without your phone or any other distractions. And sometimes around other people, but you can't speak to those for half a day because that is going to show you some shit. So this all happens, and we do this silent walking meditation on our own in these woods. And there's this question that we are to ponder of ourselves as we're in this space. 2 questions. What can I know here that I can know nowhere else? And what does this land know of me that I cannot know of myself? And they are lovely questions, by the way, if you are out and about in nature and you really want to connect in deeply. So it's what can I know here that I can know nowhere else? And what does this land know of me that I cannot know of myself? And I got this real strong message of you've been here before. And it wasn't you've been here before, like you've been to this space before, because I had been there before. It was like my third visit at this point. So it was like I've been here before, like I've had a past life. And I'm like, and I was kind of a little bit on the periphery of this. At this point, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of open to the idea that I might have a soul. I'm kind of open to the idea that maybe I've been here before. And maybe like part of my experience as a human is to come and learn some lessons that I'm supposed to learn. Um, and elevate my consciousness and do all of this stuff. I'm still a bit on the fence, to be honest. I'm like, yeah, I've heard all this stuff and maybe, but I just don't know. But I get this strong sense of like, I've been here before. And that feels like a big shift. And the coach comments, she's like, this is quite a big shift for you. And I say, because this is the same coach that I've worked with for years, right, at this point. And I'm like, but I've always been quite spiritually curious. And she laughed and she was like, no, you haven't. She was like, you were one of the most closed off people I've ever worked with. And I was like, oh, I thought I was quite open. But it's like when you're emotionally stunted and you're like, I'm an emotionally open book. As I said last week, an emotionally open book that doesn't want to do life coaching, just career coaching until it all unravels. So I come back, I've been doing, and I'm doing Reiki as well, lots of Reiki in 2022. And I have these experiences in with these visions, these real powerful visions in the Reiki of like me centuries ago, this like warrior on a horse in like war dress, or me sitting around a campfire in like with like, the kind of Native American, like Indian headdress stuff on, having all of these experiences. And then I have this time, and the Reiki practitioner, she's quite upset at the end of the session, and she's like, I need to share what came up for me, that it feels really strong that I need to share this with you. Um, and she shares that she's had this vision of one of my past lives, and it was different, but the parallels between that and my current life and my current experiences were just off the charts crazy. So all these different things happen. Um, I buy more crystals, I get my oracle cards, I get some, oh, a lovely client brings me some oracle cards. And I'm like, oh, these are interesting. And I don't think they're anything magical. That's just like how we access our own intuition, or we get some guidance. And another client brings me some tarot cards, and I'm listening to daily tarot readings on YouTube, and it's all just very interesting, right? And then this year there's been a real bigger focus for me on my dreams. So the ancient Egyptians, and many places actually, like many religions, believe that we get our guidance and are communicated with via our dreams. And I have an amazing therapist who is really into dreams, and Danielle, the coach, is also into dreams. So like this exploration of the dream, and I read books on dreams, and like understanding the power of dream. And so all that to say is that there's been a real awakening process in me alongside the corporate stuff, the practical stuff, the who am I, the what do I want, the what is my purpose, like what do I want from my work, how do I want my relationship to evolve. Didn't really talk about that last week. That's probably a whole podcast in and of itself. I will get permission from that first. We'll see what he says. I've asked him to come on before, actually. He is so far declined. Um, but all of that stuff's going on, and then there's this other side, and this other side felt a bit like I had to keep it hidden because people would think that I'd absolutely lost the plot. Um, but realizing now that it's all part of me, like we're all connected, it's all part of us. We can learn so much when we tap into all of the wisdom that is out there, not necessarily just the stuff that's been understood by science, but like what's the stuff that's been out there for a really, really long time. Um, I love working with traditional Chinese medicine. So, like, what are the remedies? What are the Eastern practices that we can use to heal and support ourselves? So, if I have got digestive issues, what are those things that I can dive into? What are the things that I can do to support my biology? And it's really looking at like what's a mix of the two. So there is that spiritual element, which I don't really bring into my work. I don't think it's necessary to bring it into my work. If clients bring it up, sometimes I will share things as an offering. But I've had experiences myself where I've worked with coaches who are quite spiritual, and then they've become born again Christians, and everything's about God and Christianity. And that's not my thing, because if I'm here to help people do things their way, it's not for me to force any of my experiences or methodologies or practices on somebody else. But what this evolution for me means is that when another client of mine is having a spiritual awakening, when they're exploring these things, I am then able to bring this part of me to the table because I've had those experiences, I've had those understandings, I know what it is to go through this process when you're in a relationship with someone who is not only not going through the process, but who is actively against the process because the process scares the fuck out of them. I understand all of those processes. So it has allowed me, as I deepen my work, expand my consciousness, and do this work, it is allowing me to work at this level on these matters with people that want to explore it. Now, do I still have clients that just want to do career coaching and don't want to talk about other stuff? Yes, though inevitably we do talk about like family things, like how the experiences that shaped us to get us where we are. But also there's this other part of me and part of my experience and part of my understanding that allows me to be alongside a person as they awaken to their truth in all aspects of their lives. And that feels good for me and it feels good for them. And this is one of the reasons why I changed my one-on-one program to be called Awaken All of You. Now, that doesn't mean that you come and work with me and I'm going to force you down a spiritual awakening path. That is not my bag. But it's like I can be alongside you with all of this stuff because I am on this journey myself, just a few steps ahead of you, because that's how this works, right? I need to be a little bit further along than you are in order for me to be able to support you. And then the last thing that I want to share today is awakening to the truth of the rules that society tries to put on us, or some of the lies that society tries to put on us in order to keep us compliant, fearful, and in control. And this has been a more recent development for me. So, like over the last 3 or 4 months, really looking into how are we controlled? How are we kept on the treadmill? Like, if you think the number of people in corporate jobs who absolutely hate what they do, but they stay because of this fear of like, but I need the steady income and I need the pension and I need the medical insurance and I need the life insurance and I can't do all of these things because my path that got mapped out to me was that I needed to go to university and then get a career and then climb up the ranks, and I can't veer from that path because that's like the accepted chosen path. It's like, how do we step back from some of that? Or ask the questions of, if I look at the rules of society, where are those rules set up to serve me and support me and allow me to do life my way? Or where are they set up to serve society? And are there areas where I don't necessarily need to follow society's rules or the roadmap that I was given because I can do things my way in order to be healthy? Like, I worked in the legal industry for a long time. Your entire life is owned by someone else. You are charging your time in 6-minute chunks and they own you. And some of them really think they own you. They don't give a shit what day it is or what time of day it is. If they need something from you, you will give it. And people in there know. They know how toxic it is. They know the behaviors are ridiculous. Like some of the stories that I've heard about how people behave in those environments, some of the things I've witnessed about how people behave in those environments, and everyone just puts up with it because it's just accepted. Because we're so conditioned to not challenge and not push back, right? That's the kind of shit in society that I think we need to be, rebelling against, doing something about. We have to awaken in order to get there. Because when we are in the compliant, checked out, slightly frozen state, we haven't got the capacity to stand up and say, this isn't okay. This is not what I want. And this is something that I didn't talk about last week or 2 weeks ago. I meant to, and I will talk about it briefly now. Sometimes awakening means coming out of the free state and regulating your nervous system and being able to connect in with yourself. Because so many people don't have access to the ability to challenge, to say no, to speak their truth, to use their voice, because of all this stuff going on in their physiology that means it doesn't feel safe for them. So even if they want to say something, they can't say it. Right. This is one of the reasons why I teach teach a free workshop called Find Your Voice. Like, this is such a fundamental part of awakening, of living your life your way. Is like, can you access your healthy note? Can you challenge? Or are you so stuck in the good girl, good guy, freeze, fawn, be perfect, just put on your persona, that you're so far removed from who you are that you just can't do any of that stuff? All of this stuff is so important, but when you take a step back and look at society, it's like society is set up to have us in this way. Like, look at the food. Look at the food available to us. Like, what's that doing to us? What's that doing to our systems? All the toxins, all the preservatives, all the chemicals, all the additives, all the artificial stuff. What's that doing to us? What's the quality of our water doing to us? What's the stuff that we engage with in news doing to us? What's the stuff that we come across? I can't remember what word I was going to use. What's the stuff that we come across on social media? What's that doing to us? What's it all doing to us? And a lot of it is perpetuating this cycle of fear and keeping us in control. Now, when you awaken to the truth of what is going on, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going out there and you're going to protest and you're going to try and change it all. But awareness is a great first step, because when you can take a step back and see it, you then get to choose how you want to engage with it and whether or not you want to let it control you. If they're trying to make you scared, but you can see the truth, you can choose not to be scared. You can be like, oh, this is just part of the agenda. But you have to be willing to ask the questions, to apply some critical thinking of like, I wonder why they're putting this in the news today. I wonder if this story is truthful, or if this story has been spun to meet an agenda of what's going on out there. And this stuff is, I mean, the spiritual stuff is challenging, but then this stuff is really challenging as well, because you run the risk again of people being like, fucking nutter, now she's a conspiracy theorist. And some of you will be thinking that. Do you know what? That's actually okay. I don't mind. I don't mind, because I'm also not saying that the stuff I'm exploring is the truth or that it's right. I'm just open enough and willing and curious enough to start questioning, start challenging, start looking, and then start making decisions for myself of, okay, well, what is the food that I want to put in my body? And when I'm choosing skincare products or cleaning products or different things, like what are the chemicals that I want in my home? And when I'm looking after my dog, what's the stuff that I want to put into her body? And when I'm looking after my husband, what's the stuff that I want him to be putting into his body? And how do I want to engage with the news or not? Or engage with the stuff out there so that I'm actually minimizing my exposure to toxins, toxic people, toxic lies, toxic rules, toxic bullshit, so that I can be as healthy as possible. Because when I am as healthy as possible, I can keep doing more of my healing, more of my growing, more of my evolving, more of my awakening. Because if, as I explained last time, if my purpose is to awaken, then I want to put myself in the environments that allow me to do that process. But if I'm constantly busy, constantly working, constantly striving, constantly pushing, and give myself no space for the other stuff, the awakening isn't going to happen, because all I'm trying to do is survive. And that was me in law for a really long time. So it's just an invitation for you to think about your awakening path. Maybe it just looks like leaving a relationship or having a time out from your family so you can heal the family dysfunctional stuff. Maybe it looks like changing jobs or tweaking what you do in your current job. Maybe for you, there is a more spiritual side. Maybe there's a religious side. Maybe for you, it's just more about health and fitness. Okay, how are you moving your body? What are you putting into your body? Maybe it's around the stuff that you bring into your home. Maybe it's around your exposure to chemicals. Like, are you in a place where there's a lot of pollution? What can you do around that? But I really want you to think about what are the steps that you can take to awaken, by which I mean coming back to the truth of who you are, what you want, what you find fun, what you're here to do. Not everyone might think they have a purpose, but maybe your purpose is just to come and have a really fucking good life and squeeze as much joy out of it and as much fun out of it as you can. I mean, that's a pretty cool purpose, right? And it's like, what do you need to do to allow that to be your path? So, just some stuff for you to think about. If you would like some free support around this, so last time I said reach out, okay? Now, when this comes out on Monday, the 21st of October, so this comes out on the Thursday before that. So, depending on when you listen to this, this might have already happened, but on Monday, I am holding two free spaces, like coaching questions, come and ask me anything, like whatever you need. I'm calling it a safe space for sharing your way, right? Which means that if you want to come and just listen in, you can just come and listen in. If you want to come and ask questions, come and ask questions. If you want coaching, come and ask for coaching. If you want to be there with your camera on so we can all see you, that's fine. If you want your camera off, have your camera off. If you want to be out on a walk or in bed or at a desk, whatever, I don't care, right? But it is a space for you, a confidential space for you to come and maybe explore some of this stuff, maybe explore something else. But if you've got challenges or things and you're like, yeah, my family aren't going to get this, or my partner isn't going to get this, or like, I don't know where to go with this. I'm trying to make this decision. How do I make this decision? What do I do? What do you mean when I say taking care of myself? What am I looking for around toxins in foods? What are the supplements I might want to take? Like, whatever it is, I am a wealth of knowledge on this stuff because I've dedicated a lot of my life to it. 6 years as a coach doing these things, but at this point, at least a decade of being really, really into the food and the fitness and the nutrition stuff, right? So there is a wealth of knowledge, and I want to spend some time with you to help you get what you need, whatever your next step of awakening looks like, right? Wherever you are at in your journey. So these calls will not be recorded. There will not be a replay. Like there's going to be no me popping on a live afterwards to talk about what's happened in the call. This is your safe space for sharing. And if you would like to experience that space, whether you're sharing your stuff or you're just experiencing other people sharing, I invite you to come on Monday. There will be a link in the show notes below. So I've got two call times so that hopefully it works for most time zones. So the first call time is 8 a.m. UK time. So those of you in the UK but who start work at 9:30, you can come before work, right? Those of you in Australia, New Zealand, it's evening for you, but it's not super late. Same with those of you in like Singapore, Korea. I've worked with people in all of those different countries. So we've got an 8 a.m. time, which is earlier than I would normally work, but I'm doing that so that you guys can come. And then there will be another call at 1:45 p.m. UK time, which is 8:45 a.m. Eastern time. So it's a little, so it gets a bit, the 1:45 p.m. UK call gets a little bit early for those of you in Pacific time. I think that's 5:45 a.m. But if you're up, come and say hi. But what it means for those of you in the UK and Europe that have to do the school pickups that will then miss my later ones, that it's early enough in the day that you can come to that class and then go do school pickup. So that is the deal on Monday. So Monday, the 21st of October, 8 a.m. and 1:45 p.m. UK time. Your safe space for sharing. And I will just be holding space for you for an hour. If you want to share some of your stories and be witnessed, if you want to ask questions for yourself, if you just want to ask me questions about any of my journey, any of my process, how did I build a business? I'm here for all of it. Or if you want coaching to work through a challenge or a decision or something that you're struggling with, bring it to that call. So it's an hour of pure that stuff, 8 till 9 and 1:45 till 2:45. If you want to know how to work with me afterwards, you can reach out. I'm not going to be selling anything on those calls. But if you feel pulled in my direction, if you're interested in some of these conversations, if you're like some of the stuff that we talk about in this podcast, you're like, oh yeah, I'd like to know a bit more about that. Come to the call. You're welcome to both, by the way. You're like, if your time zone and your schedule allows, come to both. And let's dive into some of this stuff together so that I can support you. Because this kind of work, this kind of journey, this kind of awakening can feel really lonely when you're surrounded by people who are like, oh no, but you can't change careers because that would be a waste and you've worked so hard. And what about all of that training? And you just need to carry on. And what about your pension? How are you going to pay your mortgage? And you're like, yeah, it's not helpful. Or if your path is more of a like a spiritual awakening one, or you're connecting in with other stuff, or you're even just in a place where you're feeling your feelings more, so you're more emotional and you're around people who can't really handle your emotions. I can handle your emotions. You bring it all. I'm here for it, right? So if you would like a space for that, sign up below. I will see you on Monday, and otherwise, I will see you next time. Take care and don't forget to do it your way. Ciao.
Before you go, I so hope that you enjoyed today's episode. And if you did, I'd like to ask you a favor, please, because the way that this podcast grows and the way that more people get to benefit from these materials is that more people find it. And that means that subscribes and likes and shares are so, so important to this space. So, my ask of you, if you got value from the podcast today, is give it a review, give it a like, share it with a friend, and make sure that you are subscribed. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you being here. And I look forward to continuing to support you to do life, business, relationships, and all of it your way.